Well, welcome to the session Big Idea, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Education track called A Look at Classroom Structures. I'm your moderator today, Trace Pickering. Our time together today will include talking with our panelists and addressing any audience questions you might have. All of our sessions have closed captioning access and all of our sessions are being recorded. First off, we would like to thank our sponsors, Inclusive ICR and Kirkwood, for their support. And I ask that you join us for a quick message from both of these sponsors.
Hi friends, Angelica Vanetta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to check out our website at inclusivicr.org for upcoming events and our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
Hello, I'm Lori Sundberg. I'm the president of Kirkwood Community College, and we are proud to be a sponsor of this year's conference. The Iowa Ideas Conference brings educational sessions on a variety of topics to Iowans from all over the state. It is a terrific conference, and we are proud to be a part of it. I hope you enjoy your time at the conference. Thank you.
Oh, Trace, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I thought I hit mute. My bad. Before we get started talking about classroom structures and the changes that we're beginning to see in that arena, I'd like to first introduce our three panelists today. First, we have Vicki Hyland from OPN Architects in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Give us a wave, Vicki. Vicki is one of the only 3 accredited learning environment planners in the state of Iowa. She has more than a decade of experience working with school districts as both an educational learning environment planner and on-site construction administrator. Her current position as OPN's K-12 specialist and lead educational planner gives her special insight into the very best learning design trends and best practices. Vicki regularly speaks at local and regional conventions and has a real passion for education and the impact it can have on our individual and collective futures. Welcome, Vicki.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Laura Williams. Laura is a 21st century learning specialist and a project manager for the Clearinghouse for the Work-Based Learning for the state's area education agencies, Learning Online, and at Great Prairie Area Education Agency. Laura is passionate about helping students engage in authentic learning experiences and supports teachers as a facilitator of the Iowa Authentic Learning Network. Laura's work in virtual learning over the past several years provides a unique perspective regarding learning structures in an online classroom. Hi, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, we have Mr. Dan Devore. Dan is currently the principal of City View Community Magnet High School in Cedar Rapids and director of the Iowa Big program and the district's virtual academy. City View is a new school of choice focused on engaging students in their community and building strong academic and 21st century skills through personalized learning. Prior to City View and Iowa Big, Dan served as principal of Metro High School and Alternative High School and at college community schools as both a teacher and administrator. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, I want to jump right into this with you three. I think we all know and understand the importance of the structures of educational environments and how those environments affect and enhance both human learning performance and this sense of belonging and inclusion. And so my first question to all three of you is, when you think about ideal learning environments and structures, what is top of mind for you? What do you think learning environments need to have to be equitable and inclusive and drive learning and performance, and why? who would like to start?
I can jump in and then I'll pass it to Vicki. So I guess like the top of my mind, I just think about how we need to have a variety of opportunities for students. In my bio, I really hang my hat on authentic. And so what is really happening outside of our schools to get kids engaged. And I'll quote the Trace Pickering, "Let thy community be thy curriculum." I think that would get a lot of kids engaged. And I think that finding things that they can relate to is part of the battle. But I think the other part of the battle, and this is, I see this a lot with teachers, is finding the right support for that kid. So it's not cut and dry. It's not one and done. It's really that personalized learning and personalizing the tools and supports to meet that learner's needs. And so thinking about universal design for learning through opportunities to accommodate multiple abilities, I think is really important and critical in this work. And it's hard to answer that because there's not like one cut thing to be like, hey, this is what's going to work for kids. So I say that very broadly, very loosely and generally because it's case by case. And so that's kind of what I think about when it comes to these environments for students. Pass to Vicki.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Laura, and I totally agree. I think it's all about personalization. You know, there's a lot of research out there that talks about brain research and how people learn. And there's a whole point about when you're teaching to the average, you're really not teaching to anyone. So that personalized learning opportunities for kids and individualized learning opportunities and how we learn and what kind of spaces do we learn in best? And, you know, am I someone that wants to curl up in a little cocoon to read my book? Or do I want to have a lot of stuff going on? Do I want to be sitting outside? So I think it's just understanding that we have a lot of unique needs because we're all unique.
I think one of the opportunities here as a teacher as well is if you have flexible spaces within your own classroom, is that it allows you to have those metacognitive conversations with students so they can start to see where they are as learners and what they need on a given day. So for instance, in our space here at Iowa Big, there's bean bags, there's couches, there's also tables, and the students will gravitate towards different things depending on what they need that day. And on particular days, if they're on the bean bag and not very productive, it offers that opportunity to be like, what do we do today and why? So those are big learning moments for kids to start to see what they need as learners and to be productive in general.
I like that. Like the sense of belonging would really come out there if you have that conversation. Like, hey, what's going on today? Like it opens up that room for conversation to meet that kid where they are in that moment.
Good, thank you. So Vicki, I know that you just recently returned from a conference on this very topic of school structures and environments and impact on learning. And would love for you to just share some of the things you learned there and what is research saying about school design and the structures of classrooms and buildings and that we can learn from.
I did. I just got back from a week-long conference in San Antonio. It's an annual conference, an international conference on learning environments. And it fills my bucket because we talk about a lot of different things, and learning spaces is what it's all focused around. And there is a ton of research out there. And one of the things I learned about this past week was there's a group of researchers at the University of Oregon who followed up with an RFP for the state of California. It was a fascinating session because what they had done is they took the time and they pulled together 750 different points of research through many different resources. And then they narrowed that down to 500 and they shook it all down and categorized it and talked about the things that were really important to learning environments and, realizing it's learning and it's less than teaching. It's about what those spaces are. And they talked about environmental quality. So that's air quality, that's flexibility spaces inside. We talked about the people in the community. So making people feel welcome, making kids and families feel welcome, because if you can get that support holistically, it helps in education. And the spatial environment itself, offering that flexibility, like Dan was talking about, if making sure that the spaces are student-centered, so that if today the kids are doing a lab, they might want tables and casework and things that they're sitting at. But if they're doing independent research, they may want a quiet place that they can kind of chill down with their computer or their books and really investigate personally. So there's a lot of great research, both quantitative and qualitative, but it was lots out there. Brain research as well, in terms of understanding how the brain works, how we process information is very different, the connectivity to the outdoors. So they're doing a lot more research on an annual basis, but it's all leading to that the learning environment certainly is highly impactful to learning.
So I'm assuming that includes colors and the brightness of the rooms, all of those kind of things as well.
It includes everything from temperature in the room. They find that students actually learn and function better in lower temperatures than we adults. You know, I go to work and the first thing I do is grab my space heater and turn it on right next to me because I like to be warm. But the researcher says that kids actually like a little cooler environment. The researcher talks about there was a case study that talked about how often kids get up to go to the nurse's office. Well, once that school transitioned to a place and space where kids could get up and wiggle or stand and listen or do things like that, the visits to the nursing office went down because it was more about kids needed to get up and move. And that was a way for them to get up out of the classroom and move to the nurse's office. And so they got to move around and see what was going on, whereas a small change in a classroom in terms of furniture helped reduce those numbers.
I would have to admit, I probably faked a cough in my days. So I could get up.
I think you did one in a meeting last week, actually.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks, Vicki.
Mhm.
So Dan, you have a unique opportunity in the next year to take some fairly empty space and create a new high school with it. As you think about that, what are you going to do to help focus? Because I know you're doing experiential learning, community-based learning, project-based learning. What are the implications that you see for space and structure? What are some of the cool things you're envisioning?
Well, I think what we've already talked about is that flexibility piece. The ability to have spaces where we can meet maybe with 50 kids or the whole school, up to 200, as well as places where we can pull in small groups quietly for six students for interventions or just planning on different projects. And then also space out in, again, that bigger space where students can work individually or next to a peer where they may be working on totally different things. So the key is flexibility and welcoming so that we can hit a variety of places. And I like what Laura said earlier about people being able to relate to where they are. I think that's big so that they can see themselves in that environment and see themselves as productive rather than being an outsider. We absolutely want to avoid that or making it look too institutional. So I know one of the spaces we're looking at is potentially a former office space and being a more professional environment. Some of those fluorescent lights, having to mitigate against some of those, bring in different welcoming features, whether it's sounds or other environmental aspects. What's been really fun is we have a group here at Big that before they knew anything about this project had developed an idea as a project pitch about making more welcoming educational spaces. So it's been really fascinating to have a group of students work alongside us as we're looking at that. They're doing some of the research that Vicki's already referenced as well, and have all these ideas. And I said, yeah, dream big, let's put it together and see where we can go from there. So having their voice on it, I think will help as well to make sure that we hit that mark.
Oh, I want to meet with those kids.
Yeah, I bet. We'd love to have them meet with you. And Laura, I'm sure you see now why we always pitch to Vicki, right? Like,
I was just gonna say, like, that's your business partner, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think about the sign right behind you, Dan, the big logo, but it's not just a big logo. Every student and teacher has a square on that logo back there where they get to put their own personal collage that helps explain who they are as a person. So even little things like that, I think, can make a big difference.
It goes a long way in the trauma-informed world as well. Having areas for students that can be quiet and calm. So, whether or not high trauma and ACE scores or just a bad day, having that institutional feel can really escalate a kid when they're already on the verge. That's one thing that we saw at Metro as staff did a great job of making sure they had a variety of places to do small group, do individual work, and to allow students to just kind of blow off steam when they needed it so they get back in the classroom.
I love what you're saying about that, because whether it's a calming space or a reset space, I need to break away for a minute, have a little minute, have my minute, and I'll come back. And that is amazing how many kids you'll recapture into your environment if you just give them that self-direction, that ability to self-direct when they need it.
Laura and Vicki, can you, I know you've both been inside a lot of different schools and things. Can you think of an example or two that would just kind of help illustrate what we've been talking about, what you've kind of seen teachers and principals do with space?
Well, I just was in a school in Bettendorf school, and it was neat to see. Now it's not every classroom, and I think we're getting there, like the reality of it, but having a space where kids can come and, writable surfaces, glass windows, they were writing on the glass window, so repurposing things so that you could really visualize the work. Like flexible seating, so kids have choices. I think that's really important to have choice in where they can be and find space. I really like where you can spread out. So like in your teamwork, you're not like next to another team where you can't focus because there's another team talking really loud or something. You can like spread out or utilize, other spaces within a building to get to that more focused area when you're working on a project per se. And that was elementary school. So that was pretty cool to see kids engaging in projects in such a flexible environment and writing on the walls and on the windows and things like that.
Yeah, I get to see schools all over the country, and it never ceases to amaze me what fabulous things educators and administrators do with space. And I think just giving a little help makes that even better. And so I think that it's that choice that both Laura and Dan have hit on, is that choice of, for right now, I'm going to do this individual and I need a space individually, or I'm going to do a small group. And you think about and it's very much driven by kids at their whatever age they are, what they're able to handle. So at a young age, that autonomy might be, you're pulled out in groups into an area with an adult, but you still have some pull out space to move into a different space, or within your room, maybe you have a snuggle space or a reading space or a small group space. And as you get older, maybe there's less adult intervention, but there's more supervision. So you can see kids going out together and working together across classrooms or across disciplines until you get to that older age where there really should be more autonomy and more ability to choose. I want a small room because I need some quiet time, or I need a larger space where a teacher or a speaker is going to come in and address a whole big group. So it's having those choices of spaces from small cocoon spaces to large assembly spaces is just really important. And the use of those, making sure that we're using them and we're helping educators understand that they be creative in how you put kids in these spaces.
Makes me think of this is very biology, structure function. Like, what is it? What is the purpose of the space? What can you do in this space? So if you're showcasing or sharing something, then the space should probably adhere to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to focus, well, then it should offer, a quiet space so you can focus. So kind of that structure function, like thinking about, so that kind of goes into, well, what are we doing with kids in those spaces? And I think that's just as important, that the structure meets the function. And thinking about creatively, what is it that we're engaging kids in?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. We have a question from the audience around this topic, and they ask, how is the structure of the classroom preparing our teens and our high school students for the higher learning and the workforce, the adult workforce? And how are we changing environments to better prepare them or to suit them for the adult working world?
I think what I'm seeing anyway is it's those progressive districts are the ones that are getting that choice and understanding it's either career or it's college ready, but it's giving that structure. I visited there's a much more magnet, right? Dan can talk all about big or city high school and what we can do with that. I visited one that was a magnet school for the trades. It was a construction magnet school, but it was attached to a comprehensive high school. So the kids spent part of their day there, but they got to explore that in a very physical way. And they were building tiny homes to sell to their community. So I think it's opening your mind to seeing what opportunities you can give to kids, because the more you give them, the more they'll take and the more they'll sponge in.
Yeah, we're fortunate to be in an office building right now at Iowa Big. So what students will see is how that looks in the real world, quote unquote, right? Which does look like a classroom at times, but also has the flexibility to work from other spaces. So I think what they see is that being tied to a desk isn't necessarily productivity and learning, right? One seat desk and rows isn't necessarily what that is. Instead, where in your environment, in your community, can you be productive? And I think that's the whole goal, is to set them up for that and have a better understanding of that.
Good. All right, well, thank you. Shifting gears here a little bit. Laura, I know you've spent a lot of time the last few years, last several years, engaging and interacting with virtual learning environments, which we see more and more. I'd really be interested to know, what is the implications for space and structure and environment when kids are virtual, and what have you seen any interesting things in that regard, or how do teachers help kids create the environment in their homes that are conducive for their work?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question. I'm going to think where I want to start with that. So I think some of the work that I do really adheres to kind of like upping the ante with those virtual learning opportunities. And so I'm just going to say it, like, I hate seeing just like sit and get, online programs that you just kind of have to check the box off and say you did it, because I feel like that's really wasting students' potential. And I think we miss the mark in some of those self-paced learning environments on developing those, critical 21st century skills, those future ready, like preparing for the workforce. And so when I work with schools and I coach, I've coached a couple different schools on different possibilities for their online learning environment and what they might, offer. And I always think, like, if you can add an element of like in-person and online, blended, synchronous. So like, even if you're just meeting on Zoom, having those check-ins, having those conversations, I think really helps for that sense of belonging. So that's one thing, is definitely think of ways to sort of blend the experience, not just a sit and get, like, let's just say it, boring, like not a good use of time. I'll say it. This is recorded right now. Some of those, I mean, it is like, I've gone and I've observed and I've seen what students have to do in some of those, even credit recovery, which is all online. Like, it is not, I don't think it's impacting kids the way that we want to. Yes, it gets them a diploma, and that is a good thing. Absolutely. But like, couldn't we do better? And so my experience has really, like, how can we do better? And so some of the things that I've seen and that we've worked on is in that future ready bucket. And so career immersions, working with Iowa business and industry partners to create sort of pre-trainings and trainings and really immerse kids in that. We've developed some VR opportunities for students. You don't have to have VR. So if that's a limitation for a district, you can use a web browser to explore and click around and see things. But it's really immersive if you do have VR. And so you could go to a grain bin. What's that like? Not that we all want to go in a grain bin, but you could in a VR environment. You can explore a cement truck. That's another one. You can go to the governor's mansion. And so when I think about equity, I think about, not everybody gets to go and see and do these things. And so if we can use technology to open it up so you at least can see it and kind of click around and like be immersed in it as if you were there, I think that's really powerful. And so I try to encourage schools to incorporate that into their curriculum. So those training, getting kids aware of different career fields, being exposed to it. So they're not thinking, I could be a doctor, a lawyer, a policeman, like the traditional like jobs out there. But hey, no, there's actually a lot more. Home Builders Association, they're a great partner. They've got some trainings on there. So just really exposing students to lots of opportunity. And then obviously the clearinghouse, could we have a project that we work on at a distance? Could we line up kids and be in partnership with each other as a team to like do the project and really get into those universal constructs of, productivity, accountability. And then finally, I would just add, sorry, I'm like, remember I said this, I'm talking too much. I would say getting those industry standard processes and like how do real people do work, and like take some of those processes and then bring them into the learning environment. So I know you guys are very familiar with this at Iowa Big. In fact, I think Iowa Big was the first example I've seen of it in practice, but using agile practices, like even a Scrum board or things like that, Kanban board, in managing project work. I think that using those in an online environment, even like a Trello app or the Miro board or whatever, I think those are really important to expose kids to. So yeah, I just think kind of like upping the ante on like what we used to offer online. I think it's really opened up to what we could be offering online.
Thank you, Laura. We had another question from the audience. This strand deals with diversity, equity, and inclusivity as a theme. And I know we've talked about in general the kinds of environments that we need to provide for students. What are some unique issues that we might need to think about to be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, especially with Black, Indigenous people of color? And how can we think about that, or how do we think about that in our design work?
We had some sessions this past week about that, and it's about the recognition. Honestly, it's about recognizing what kind of things are important. There are Indigenous groups that the outdoor becomes very important. Well, we know biophilic design is really important, but we also know we want that even to enforce that connectivity to nature and what those lands mean. So that's an example. I think it's providing opportunities for kids to explore. Right? And exploration might happen independently. It might happen in a team room, in a media center. It might happen in project work, in examining soils and, fossils or whatever that might be. So I think it's just offering opportunities and being open and having the space that supports it.
Yeah, in my limited understanding of all different types of cultures, right? One thing I do know is the flexibility and willingness to learn more about what that individual or culture needs is integral. So that ability to move, if that's what is needed, or the ability to be outside, or to work in a group in some capacities more than others, and things like that are important. And again, it goes back to not locking down all your structures so tightly that there isn't that opportunity to explore, just like Vicki said.
I also think that some schools are exploring, and I just am so excited about this for education, but we always talk about schools being the heart of a community, and they really are. They're what draws people to your community. If you have strong schools and supportive schools and welcoming schools. And so some schools are looking at family resource centers. So we think about educating the kids or providing learning opportunities for the kids. But if we don't bring the families and parents and siblings along with that, we lose an opportunity. So when you can co-locate some family resource opportunities where you have events, and maybe it's a cultural event that happens monthly, that you bring in the families and they can celebrate their heritage, and you have spaces in the school that the kids feel welcome, the parents feel welcome. I think we have to look at those spaces, things like that, and trying to figure out, you think about a school board room, right? A school board meeting room is used once or twice a month in the evenings. But think about taking a space like that, or thinking about a commons area that you're used for lunch and purposing it differently, or adding some auxiliary spaces that can enhance the use of that space. I think that's another way you can design. And certainly in terms of inclusivity, looking at even restroom design, looking at having individual stall restrooms, not having group restrooms, and things that make people feel okay and safe. When Laura talked about COVID and what happened with online learning, that was a trauma. Dan talked about trauma-informed design. And you think about kids coming back need to then, they've been tucked away, right? And so have families, and so have workers. So bringing them back to school, you need to feel safe in those environments, and things like that will help feel welcoming and safe in those environments.
I guess I would just add, like, everything you guys just said is absolutely, I'm on point with you on that. I think having conversations and celebrating difference and diversity is really important, to make people feel welcomed and part of that community, and kind of evolving the, like some things that people bring to the table can change sort of the way the school functions or the way the classroom functions. And I think you could really take that to your benefit, honestly, to make school even better and more inclusive. The only thing I'll add is just, having the technology that can maybe help level the playing field somewhat, because I'm just thinking, like, just recently, even at the AEA, we've been supporting translation earbuds. Like, how cool is that? Like, if we can eliminate some of those impediments, those barriers to connecting and to growth for students, I think that's really important. So that's the only thing I'll add to that.
We had another question. Do teachers in Iowa public schools receive funding to help make their classrooms more comfortable and innovative? Well, there's not a specific fund for that, I know, because many teachers we know around the country have to pay for things like the lamps, the pillows, the bean bags, and so forth. So I think that leads into a question I also had is given that there's always a constraint to any design, in some classrooms, there are some classrooms that were built in the 1930s, right? Given those constraints, what are some things teachers can do to make these fairly constrained spaces more learner friendly? And I don't know, Vicki, you may know how schools try to fund things that aren't desks, right? That are lamps and beanbag chairs and things like that.
Lava lamps. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's hard. Schools, especially now. I mean, when you think about building or renovating spaces right now, the last 18 months have been so hard, whether you're building a home, a new garage, replacing your windows, but especially building public buildings like schools. They're expensive. And when prices have gone up and costs have gone up sometimes 50% or more, it becomes very cost prohibitive. I was just having a conversation about this recently with somebody about, I wish some of the federal funds that were put aside were put into school opportunities that could fund some of these ideas for flexible furniture, like the COVID funds. Think about that and think about what an impact that could have had for bringing kids back together. But funding is hard, and you have your sales tax dollars and you have PEPAL funds, and GO bonds can go, but it's tough to get those funds. Sometimes PTOs will fund them. It's surprising though, when people ask how willing people are to help. And so I think it's trying to think outside the box, and some of these, double loaded corridors from 1930s or 50s or 1900s that all you have is a skinny little corridor with hard surface floors and just classroom on the sides and lockers in between. They're not set up. So think about, maybe you remove half the furniture and maybe you do a fundraiser for stools and tables instead and split it out so you can move around in the space. Try to make it less dense in the room so there's more opportunity for kids and teachers and staff to move around it. So clear out the stuff and give more space.
And we talked earlier about being creative, and I'll shout out Jeff and Tracy from Metro, who created their own standing desks for students. We had looked, we had some in the building already. We wanted to order more, and we had some funds that we could do that. And recognizing if a teacher came with an idea for more flexible learning environment, we were going to try to make that happen. But with supply chain issues, the prices had skyrocketed. It was insane how expensive these were. So it was like, well, we could buy one or two, but is it worth it? And they started doing some digging and came back from Menards with a couple tools and started making their own desks. It was fantastic. They weren't, you couldn't stand on the desk, but it was for math class, right? You can write on them. We're good. So they again, just took that opportunity to be like, why not? Let's give this a shot. And overall, they worked for students, and that was the goal. And then I think the other thing, just in general, is the more draconian procedures and structures we put in place, the less likely and the less of the ability to use these things. So I think it's important for administrators to remember that risk mitigation and management doesn't necessarily mean control. So making sure that when we're setting up our policies and procedures, if we have these beautiful spaces that we can use, make sure we allow the staff and students to be able to use those in ways that can be helpful, rather than trying to lock down every aspect of the building. That can definitely hamper that growth.
What you just said about the making the desks, that's it made me think of Eddyville, Blakeford, Fremont, EBF, all the consolidated schools in rural Iowa. They had used their shop class to help build a kind of a coffee shop. So they turned their business classroom into a real coffee shop. And so they got creative with that space and using the resources that they had. And they did ask for some funding, and they had to get a little bit of money from the community, but I thought that was pretty cool. One thing as doing my due diligence as a STEM board advisory member, the STEM Best Awards in Iowa are pretty popular, and we have, I think, like almost 190, I don't know, something like that, have applied for an award, and those funds are typically used to redesign the space. And so if you are an educator listening, there is a grant open right now that's 40,000 match grant, and so you can use some of those funds to redesign your classroom essentially. So that's seemingly, as long as there's money and funding, an annual opportunity to get, and I think they did like 20 schools like each time, so, or 20 grants or awards, excuse me.
I think about all these comments, and then, like, what Dan was saying about risk management and that, and sometimes there's an overemphasis on standardization. And a can of paint isn't that expensive, right? To bring into a classroom to brighten up a space. And I think there's some low cost ways that schools and teachers can make fairly big differences in the spaces that they have. Let's see, we only have a few minutes left. Trying to think about what is a good wrap-up question for us would be here. I think, Vicki, this might give us an opportunity just to talk about if you do have the opportunity to do a major renovation or build a new school, what are the top 2 or 3 things educators need to be thinking about, or community members should be supporting when you build a new school? Sometimes it makes me sad when I'll see a school that's 5 years old or newer, and it looks like the school's from 1950s. And that just really bums me out. You blew a huge opportunity here. So
yep. That makes me very sad too. I saw a high school like that last week, and I was so sad coming away that you had this amazing opportunity, and there's nothing creative and new and exciting here. And I love what Dan was saying about opening up your schools and making them inviting to kids and making them student-centered. I think safety and security aside, that's number 1 to everybody's mind. It's different than what people think, but let's put that aside. In terms of the environment itself, though, making it flexible, making it approachable, making it student-centered. It makes me so sad because we've done some type of projects where the rooms are student-centered and they're set up for different kinds of learning and engagement, and the teachers then go there. That's where the teachers take the kids that need to go that kind of environment this week and this kind next week. And it makes me sad that there's sometimes so much entrenchment in wanting to have my own space, always this space. And that's not the way. I'd rather have flexible spaces like Dan, you started out with. If I feel like a sofa today for what I'm doing versus tables, what I'm doing. So let the instructor, I think of an instructor as a facilitator, let the facilitator go with the students in terms of what they're doing and make it a student-centered space. I think that's critical, flexible and approachable.
Good. Or Dan, any final comments, thoughts?
I would just add that, definitely student-centered, and, in this world of like creating authentic projects for kids, I think having them part of that conversation and the design process is critical. It helps with ownership. It gives us new insights. We're getting user feedback in real time on the space. And so I think definitely keep students as part of that planning team if you do get the opportunity to design a space or a school.
I think focusing on building community and not sorting and the ease of flow necessarily first. I also think the most important use I've seen of this concept has been in the individual classroom by individual teachers that were passionate about it and allowed their students to explore it. So I think as much as the structures are important, freeing teachers to be able to explore those things for their own students and trusting them to make the best choices as a professional.
Excellent. All right, well, Vicki, Laura, Dan, appreciate your time and your insights today. To the audience that phoned in or zoomed in, I guess, thank you. Appreciate the questions and the conversation today.